I'm going to be reading from an audio story which I had written recently, and which is available on the Storytel app. It's called "Why I Killed My Husband." I should have killed my husband when he nicknamed me Bonda. It was the fourth day after the wedding. I was at Madhavan's home. The hustle and bustle of the wedding was over, and all the relatives had returned to their homes with their tambulam bags, with their share from the prodigious quantities of murukku, adirasam, laddu, and Mysore pak that had accompanied me to my married home. The relatives admired the bags and contents. Nevertheless, their whispered grumblings reached my ears. I think they used dalda instead of ghee in the Mysore pak. The murku only has five worries in it. The diamond in the nosepin could have been bigger. The girl looks like a brinjal, short, round, and dark. I didn't care about what the relatives said. I saw myself in the mirror every day and I knew what I looked like. As for the complaints, it was customary at every wedding. In fact, Amma said that if the groom's relatives didn't complain, there was something wrong with him. The house still had a festive air to it. Madhavan's brother and wife lived there, and now so did I. His sister and her husband, and Madhavan's aunt, all of whom lived in Canada, were also there. They would leave soon. Meanwhile, the older children watched TV and the younger ones ran around. It was all like I had imagined it to be. Did I mention our marriage was consummated? When what had to be done was done, I realized why the nuptial chambers have to be dressed up. Furtive, messy, and accompanied by thrashing limbs and rained in breath, the sharing of body fluids made me wonder what the fuss was all about. I hadn't ever had a boyfriend, but I had read up on sex and knew what it entailed. I even knew how to expect some pain, but it was all over even before I got warmed up, and I was too shy to ask, "What about me?" I thought of my mother making badams. I couldn't match her speed, and Amma would say, "You'll catch up once you get the hang of it. All you need is practice." I don't suppose you know anything about badams that are homemade. You probably eat those ghastly cardboard like chips that come in a packet. Come to think of it, sex and eating a badam is pretty much the same. Badams require an elaborate preparation, the mixing of the dough, the shaping of it into coils with fingers or a press, and then the sun drying it while safeguarding it from raiding ants and marauding crows. And then the oil has to be heated just right so that the badams fluff out to a golden fullness and sets everyone's mouth watering when it is brought to the table. And what do we do with it? We pop it into our mouth, and in two bites, it's gone. After all that build up in books and movies, and all the wink wink by aunts and cousins about breaking the bedstead and making the earth move, etc., I had expected more from sex than the two bites and gone experience. But as everyone knows, badams just add the crunch factor to a meal. It cannot be the meal itself, so I decided that some things were better imagined than realized and refused to let it trouble me. Where was I? I was telling you about my fourth day as a married woman. I had worn a double shaded coffee brown kanjivaram with a thin zari line set in an indigo border. I had fallen in love with the sari and bought it for myself after haggling with my conscience. I told everyone who asked that it cost just 10,000 rupees instead of the 18,000 I paid for it. Even then, my mother had gasped a little. It was what my parents had run their household on until my job changed our circumstances. As soon as I was eligible to do so, I had taken a housing loan and bought us a small but brand new apartment in Besant Nagar. It had a living cum dining room, two bedrooms with bath attached, a little study, two balconies that overlooked the quiet tree lined street we were on, and a fairly large kitchen. My parents were ecstatic. We were a typical middle class Tambram family, and a home of our own was our defining moment. So, dressed in my new Kanjivaram sari, I added a string of jasmine buds to my waist long hair clasped in a matching brown and blue hair clip, and stepped out of our room. It was the first time we would be as a family. Madhavan, his siblings, and their spouses. There would be no bulwark of relatives to deflect the attention from me. I was both apprehensive and excited. New brides will understand this. You so want to belong that you go the extra mile. You so want to make an impression of the right sort that you rush to do this and that. My husband watched me with an expression I couldn't read. After an elaborate meal, someone suggested a game of Ludo. The Ludo board was pulled out, and mother and sister unearthed a pair of old brass dice from the sewing machine box. Madhavin was one of the players. His brother in law and sister and his aunt were the other players. I wished they had included me, but they didn't. So I sat behind Madhavan as if to pledge my allegiance. The brass dice fell on the floor with a clink. There was much talk and peals of laughter as family jokes were cracked and memories dredged out. The camaraderie in the room included me, and so when my sister in law's husband was trounced, she mock frowned and said, Raghu, your mind is not on the game. He gave her a grin and said, how can I concentrate on the game when you sit across me? You look like, He groped for words. I supplied the words in the spirit of the moment. In that yellow sari and your black puttu, you look like a laddu with a raisin stuck into it. My laughter rang loud and clear. I failed to see my sister in law's face fall. I failed to realize that while her husband was allowed to rib her, I was the new bride. I should have said something appropriate, like Akka looks like a goddess descended down to earth. Instead, I had called her a laddu. I failed to see the rage that striated my husband's brow. He turned to look at me and snapped. What are you laughing for? You look like a bonda, and in that sari, you look like a burnt bonda. I didn't know if it was the sari or that I was the color of a deep brown bonda and plump to boot. All I heard was the loud titter among the players and the audience. A couple of children took up the chant, Bonda, Bonda, burnt Bonda. And just like that, I became Bonda. No one ever called me by my name again. Not Anjali, my given name, or Kalyani, Madhavan's family had decided was to be my married name. All of them just called me Bonda. I gave the sari away to my mother and learned to zip my mouth when I was with Madhavan's family. In the weighing scales of matrimony, I had fallen short again. I should have killed my husband when I first heard him play the violin. I didn't grow up with music, not like Madhavan. My parents enjoyed listening to music, but it ended there. Despite this, when I was 5 years old, they decided to send me to a music teacher. I hid in the toilet the next evening when it was time to go to class. The thought of having to open my mouth and sing in front of everyone petrified me. My mother dragged me out of the toilet with an enraged laugh. Who's going to marry you if you can't even sing sa pa sa? She said as she thrust me into my father's arms. For 5 years thereafter, I endured a teacher whose method of teaching was to make us sing by rote. It was both tedious and dull. She would wind a little alarm clock and place it next to the Shruti box. Exactly when the hour was up, it would trill and she would stop. Fortunately, when I was 10, I scored a mere 80 out of 100 in mathematics. My father wouldn't have been more appalled if I had been expelled. The music lessons were replaced by maths tuition classes, and here I found comfort. The numbers were easier to grapple with than the whimsical musical notes. When Madhavan's marriage proposal was brought home, my 5 years of music tutelage was trotted out. A classical musician like Madhavan needed a wife who understood the rigor that music demanded, the broker said with a broad smile. A week after we were married, and when the house guests had returned to Toronto, to be said without the second tea, I was told by everyone, including the children, Madhavan sat down early in the day with his violin. For a moment, I wished he would gaze at me with the tenderness he looked at his violin with. When he placed it in the sweet spot between his shoulder and chest, and ran the bow over the strings with almost without touching it. I felt bereft. I saw on his face a passion, a deep sensuality that I had never seen before, and I knew I would never be able to complete him as his violin did. Then he played a few notes, and it was as if he was speaking to the violin. It was as if he was crooning to his beloved, persuading her to do his bidding. Then he played a Tyagaraja Kriti, Mohana Rama in Mohana Ragam. It's one of the few ragams I could recognize. I had heard several renditions of it over the years, but Madhavan and his violin owned it. He built it up phrase by phrase, and it was as if my heart would burst with the love I felt for him. The magnificence of that musical edifice overwhelmed me. It was a moment like I had never known and never did again. Thank you, gods, for bringing Madhavan into my life, I murmured in my head. When he finished, he looked at me, but I couldn't speak. Besides, I remembered the marriage broker had said that while Madhavan wanted a wife who understood music, he didn't want a wife with a musical opinion. So I sat there hoping he would see in my eyes the admiration and respect I had for him. He put his bow down and said, I may as well have played to a donkey. Thank you so much, and I'd like to wish everyone all the very best for the HD Book Brunch Challenge.